Welcome, everyone. My name is Anjula Gogia. I'm the events coordinator at Another Story Bookshop, and it's my absolute pleasure to be hosting the launch for Sheung-King's fabulous new novel, You Are Eating an Orange, You Are Naked. Before we begin, I would like to give our land acknowledgement for the event. The sacred land on which we operate, has been a site of human activity for 15,000 years. This land is a territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, and the nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Tura Wampum says we are going to live on this land together and respect each other's sovereignty. The Dish with One is an agreement that recognizes that we live off the same resources. It is hard to eat a collective meal together off a dish with one spoon, hence protocols are put in place to ensure mutual respect by 46 treaties and other agreements. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. Our intersecting native to this land, Indigenous people from other territories, as well as settlers who have come here by choice, force, or otherwise a result of colonialism and imperialism. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission 94 calls to action reaffirms that the treaties with Indigenous peoples must be lawfully honored. We are all treaty peoples and are responsible for honoring and upholding those agreements. We are grateful for the opportunity to work on this territory and to share space with all of you. So again, I'm speaking from Another Story Bookshop. I'm the events coordinator, and we are one of Toronto's oldest independent bookstores with a focus on equity, diversity, and social justice. Come visit us on Roncesvalles. We are very pleased to be working with our fabulous partners at Book Hug Press. Big thank you to Hazel Miller and Alex Spears, who is doing the tech for tonight. We're so thrilled to have this book for sale. It's such a tough time for authors right now. And Sheung-King, big congratulations from all of us. You Are Eating an Orange is now officially in stock. We just opened up for limited browsing last week, so you can come by and come into our doors. You can also order online for curbside pickup, local delivery, and shipment across Canada. You don't need an advance purchase to come in. Sheung-King Aaron Tang will be stopping by our store tomorrow, Wednesday, October 28th, to personalize copies. So this is the best way to get a copy just to come in. Sheung-King Aaron Tang will be stopping by our store tomorrow, Wednesday, October 28th, to personalize copies. So this is the best way to get a copy signed to you, is to order online at anotherstory.ca. Say, please personalize, and write the name that you'd like Sheung-King to personalize it for. Without live book launch host for tonight's event, Mahek Chain. Mahek Chain is how else can you get your book signed just for you? So without further ado, host for tonight's event, Mahek Chain. Mahek Chain writes fiction and poetry for young people and adults. She is the author of the picture book Maya, illustrated BC Best Book of the Year, a Kirkus Best Book of the Year, and the winner of the 2017 South Asia, US and Canada. And she has been longlisted for the Writers' Trust of Canada McClelland Stewart Journey Prize. Born in Delhi, Mahek has also, thank you for hosting tonight. I hope you all enjoyed tonight's event and order your copy at anotherstory.ca. Congratulations, Sheung-King Aaron Tang. We're so pleased to have this in our store.
Thank you so much, Angela. And thank you everyone for being with us today to celebrate the launch of Sheung-King Aaron Tang's debut novel, You're Eating an Orange, You're Naked. My name is Mahak, and I'll be your host for this evening. I am so excited to be here to introduce this incredible author and fascinating book. We're going to begin our event with a short reading from Sheung-King, followed by a conversation between the two of us. We'll also leave some time at the end for you to ask questions. You can submit questions anytime you'd like. Just use the Q&A box to submit them instead of the chat box. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can leave a question in the comments. And finally, I want to let you know that if you're watching on Zoom, closed captioning is available for this event. So if you would like to have that option, you can turn it on at your screen. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest of honor for this evening. Sheung-King Aaron Tang is a writer and post-secondary educator who grew up in Hong Kong and is currently based in Toronto. His writing has appeared in Prism International, Puritan Magazine, the Humber Literary Review, among others. In 2019, Sheung-King was nominated for a Pushcart Prize by the Shanghai Literary Review for nonfiction. He is currently an artist in residence at the Ada Dada Residency. Sheung-King's debut novel, You're Eating an Orange, You're Naked, whose release we're celebrating this evening, is an atmospheric, elliptical book about a young translator living in Toronto who frequently travels abroad to Hong Kong, Macau, Prague, Tokyo, often with an unnamed lover who has a tendency to disappear without explanation. In restaurants and hotel rooms, the enigmatic and sometimes comic couple tell folk tales to each other, engaging in verbal play and philosophical questions that challenge Western tropes. It's my pleasure now to invite Sheung-King to join us and read some pages from his novel.
Hi everyone, thanks for being here. Thank you, Mahak. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Pohag, and thank you everybody for coming here. I'm gonna start off by reading a little bit from chapters that are set in Macau and Taiwan, because we all kind of miss traveling. All right, Memory Peace Macau. The year is 2014. We are in a hotel room in Macau. We are on the bed. This is our second May together. Your eyes are brown, you say. Yes, most Chinese people have brown eyes. You don't respond. You sniff the side of my neck. A long sniff, like you're snorting a line of cocaine. It feels nice. You smell me. I smell you. Yourself. I sniff my arm. Me. We smell the same. You. We use the same soap, the hotel soap. I wonder if everybody in this hotel smells the same. The walls in the hotel room are white and the lights are yellow. Me. I'm just reminded of something. You. How you speak is kind of weird. Me. What? You. The way you say things is a little odd. Me. Remember when we were 19? We lived in that old apartment near the campus? You. I never noticed it before, but there's something strange about the way you talk. What time is it? Me. Sometimes when you were drunk, you would flick my dick and just walk away. You do that on the street, at home, and sometimes even when we're at other people's places. I never knew how to feel. You. It's 9 in the morning. Me. One day you just stopped doing that, but last night you did it again. You. Have you ever gambled? Me. No. You. Why do you think people gamble? Me. I don't know. You. I don't like people who gamble. I used to date this guy who gambled. It was just a summer fling. He dressed well. I wasn't that into him. I had to leave the country, so we ended things. Some time passes. You're no longer looking in my direction. You're staring at the ceiling. You're thinking about the guy who gambled, I realize. I feel like you just flicked my dick and walked away. 2. In Macau, metaphors are part of reality. All the hotels in Macau have casinos. Shiny silver adornments shaped like crescent moons hang from the ceilings. They resemble knives and surround the interiors of the hotel. Some of the hotels themselves look like giant knives. By knives, I do not mean kitchen knives, but guando. If you look up the image of the Grand Lisboa in Macau, you'll see that the entire building looks like a blade of a guando. The reason for the knife-shaped decor has something to do with feng shui. There is a slang phrase in Cantonese, a neck covered in blood, yet ganghut, meaning the loss of fortune. So when I say in Cantonese, I'm trying to make your neck bleed. It means I'm trying to take money away from you. And if, let's say, I lose a great sum of money in the casino, I would say my neck was sliced and is now bleeding all over. Casinos in Macau have giant knife-like decorations because casino owners want to slice people's necks. Next to the Grand Lisboa is Casino Lisboa. There is a cliche in Cantonese that is often used by villains in gangster films. You will not be able to escape even if you grow wings. This Casino Lisboa is shaped like a birdcage. All right, that's the opening of Memory Peace Macau. I will read a little bit from another chapter called Lanterns and Letters. Lanterns and letters. The word koi and li make up the term concept. Koi by itself means approximate or in general, and li means thought or idea. But it can also mean read or recite. When put together, koi lim, to me at least, means approximately an idea or not quite an idea yet. Is it you? I don't recognize the woman's voice. No, I said. She hung up. I went for a jog by the lake. The water was still. Maybe I could jog to China. I didn't jog to China. I came home, made myself breakfast, took a shower while you slept on. Are you all packed? I asked. We're going to Taiwan this evening. You don't respond. I continue to think about the question. Is it you? This is a series of events. The events have no center, no fulcrum, no singular meaning, and the center of an event is just another shade of events with no center. Long time ago, there were 10 suns in the sky. The sun incinerated all the planets on Earth. One day, an archer shot down 9 of the 10 suns. As a reward, the Queen Mother of the West gave the archer an elixir. The elixir would make him immortal, but there was only enough elixir for one person. The archer didn't want to be immortal. All the archer wanted was live with his wife, Chang'e, his wife. He didn't drink the elixir, but instead asked Chang'e to keep it safe for him. One day, one of the Archer's students pretended to be ill so that he could be relieved from hunting duty. After Archer left to hunt, the student demanded that Chang'e gave him the elixir. Chang'e, knowing she would not stand a chance if he tried to fight the student, drank the elixir immediately. The elixir gave her the power to fly. She soared higher and higher until in the end she reached the moon and became immortal. The archer was very sad when he received the news of her disappearance. He moved the table under the moon. Every night he had dinner in the moonlight. He imagined himself having dinner with her. Why do you think she drank the elixir? You asked. So the student wouldn't be able to take it? You're stupid. I don't disagree. Why would she care if someone had it? You know what? I think she wanted to be immortal more than she wanted to be with the archer. She was just waiting for the right moment to drink it so people won't remember her as an elixir stealing bitch. You're going to have a hard time being mortal if everybody thinks you're that. I mean, why else would her first reaction to drink the elixir? That will be all for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that reading, Sheung-King. I'm so excited to have this chance to speak with you about your novel. I feel so privileged to have this chance. I have so many questions, and I'm sure I won't have the chance to get to all of them. For our audience, if questions come to you as we speak, please submit them in the Q&A box anytime you'd like. And if you're joining us on YouTube, you can ask your question in the comments. We'll save some time at the end to respond to audience questions. I thought I'd start off a little easy. Aaron, could you tell us a little bit about how this novel came about? Like, how did you come to write this story, the story behind the story, so to speak?
Well, a lot of the stories here are kind of about other stories, so it's in a way like a commentary on a film or a text or a series of texts or a folktale. So it's a story about how we're constantly being influenced by other stories. So I started writing this as a grad student during my MFA, and because of because of my background of being an undergraduate student at Queens, where you don't really get the opportunity to read diverse forms of writing or literature, I started reading a lot of folk tales, and I started trying to integrate these folk tales and their mode of storytelling and their kind of form of storytelling into um, this story where the characters inside one story is constantly referencing other things to inform their lives.
Yeah, I mean that's so interesting too because I think I'm especially intrigued by that because about this around this idea of auto fiction because the novel's narrator bears a lot of similarity to you, and the narrator too is working on a novel, which he describes as a work of auto fiction. And one of the qualities of auto fiction is that this form explores the narrator as a writer and refers to the creation of the book itself, which you also do. And then you're also talking about all of these stories that create our stories. So I'm just curious for you, what was it about the possibilities of writing autofiction and especially incorporating in these folk tales that really intrigued you?
Um, I I don't know. It was kind of easier because back then, as a student, you're constantly trying to read as many things or go to as many places as possible, and that kind of just naturally informed the writing of the book that I have right now, and a bunch of them have actually been published as smaller short stories or articles. Um, in one form or another. Some are published as nonfiction, some are published as fiction. So I think in a way the how I was living my life back then kind of helped me put together this book in somewhat natural way.
But it must have been such a curation process, deciding which folk tales would you include and which, films or works of literature you would reference. Did you end up having a lot that you left out? And or how did you go about deciding what you would leave in the book?
Actually, no, I think I tend to stop reading or watching things that I don't think are interesting, and as long as the things are interesting to me, it making it part of the book was not that hard.
Okay, so that part came very instinctively. Well,
Yeah.
one of the similarities between you and the narrator is that you're both translators, and the novel explores what it means to be a translator. And at heart, I think the novel is, well, one of the things it's about is language. And there's points where the narrator talks about how words are created and words are simply concepts that correspond to reality, but are not actually reality. And he says at one point, this line really stayed with me. He says, my job had made me become transparent. My translation had no meaning, no concept. I spoke but was not translating. I was transparent. So, can you talk about how your work as a translator has influenced you as a writer and your approach to language?
I actually have not worked that much as a translator. Yeah, I've only done one or two translation projects, but I'm not myself a professional translator. But I've always been interested, and a lot of this is influenced by the writer Yoko Tawada, who's Japanese and German. So she's often working in between these languages, and 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 she tries to navigate the kind of liberal space between these two languages and traditions behind them. And the idea of language being only corresponding to the reality structure that we are living in is one that I kind of borrowed from Deleuze, where he explains language concepts as not necessarily language. But when we put concepts into language, it's to navigate the social spaces that we exist in. So in the mind of a translator, in between these social spaces, how do ideas work in the head? So it's just this really abstract idea that you can only go about discussing indirectly and through other stories. So that's also kind of why the novel itself has so many different stories that get brought in, because to go with this theme of how to understand a space through understanding other spaces around it.
Yeah, this idea of indirectness. There's a point in the book which the narrator is grappling with how to incorporate social critique in his writing, and he comes to this conclusion that critique must be indirect, and that this is how most of the novel is written too. But near the end, the narrator discusses this decision to be indirect very consciously, so very directly, citing examples from various works of literature. And the novel is full of this kind of duality, this direct and indirect, weightlessness and weightiness, and fixed and looseness. It's grounded and transparent and real and imagined. And duality may not be the right word, perhaps the coexistence of contradictory states of being. And what is it about that fascinates you about these paradoxes, or as you mentioned, liminality or existing between these spaces?
Yeah, I think that also has to do with how you mentioned how this is a work of autofiction. It has to do with how I kind of mobilize myself here, and a lot of my friends are the same, where we grow up in between and with in between multiple cultures. So when you're in that state of being where your identity is constructed through being at different spaces, like yourself, growing up and having lived in so many spaces, how you construct your identity is not from one space. It's about noticing the kind of differences between each space you have been in and has an influence on you. And that slowly comes together as what we perceive as the identity of the characters. And one of the things that my characters try really hard not to do is to assimilate or conform to a certain space. So that's why they're constantly traveling, moving around, and questioning everything. They ask a lot of questions about every situation they're in. They question Orientalism, Western tropes, all of these things, but they don't. The point is not so much to find an answer or find what the binaries are, but to constantly be doing that in order to maintain a sense of their identity.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things in what you just said. There's like three different questions and three different directions I want to head in at the same time because there's so much richness here. Okay, just starting with the point. I mean, it's true. I very much reading the book, that idea of liminality, being between many spaces. I personally, was immediately very engaged with that idea because of my own background. And there's this moment in the novel when the narrator is at the TNT supermarket in Toronto and he observes the cargo coming from overseas and he feels like he's outside the country and he says, for some reason I feel transparent again, and we keep returning to this idea of transparency. And this is this character who over the course of the novel moves between many countries. And so I just was also fascinated about what perhaps you might be doing here in terms of nationhood or countries, and this feeling of being grounded or not grounded in the world. Could you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think one of the things that interests me is not kind of immigrant literature in a really straightforward way where you're leaving from one place because of one reason and ending up another and having to struggle in that place because of other reasons that exist in that place. Um, in a way, my characters are lucky. They're kind of privileged that they have the capacity to mobilize themselves in a way that they can constantly be switching places. So once you're doing that, you're constantly under different kind of governance and different sort of states, um, and um, and if you're constantly trying to resist that, you can kind of become transparent in a way in that you're not giving up your identity or what you kind of are towards a specific state. By state, I mean like a form of government. So if by constantly moving around, you're dispersing your identity and you're not allowing the state to own you. So in a way, you're kind of transparent. Um, I have to say, I would have taken this to another level if I written it today. How the characters can be even more um, existing in a stateless state. For example, they might just use they won't use cash or credit cards, have no bank accounts, and um, just use cryptocurrency, and they spend it all in one day or something like that. So, in order to
Well,
be completely transparent to any kind of state control.
it's very virally to be editing your novel while launching it. Which is very
Sorry, the
exciting
fuck.
though for your future books in terms of this idea. Um,
Mm,
with one of the interesting things though, you bring up this idea of transparency, and there's this moment. I'm going to misquote it, so I'm completely sort of improvising here. But there's this moment in the novel where sort of Nietzsche is brought up, and um, the narrator's lover thinks how it's so strange that people need to feel have a sense of purpose or feel that they have any kind of weight in life. That's such a strange expectation, and this idea of transparency or looseness or being dispersed, it's not very frightening, at least the way it's presented in the novel. It's very similar to in one of the lines that you just read from, this idea that there's no fulcrum, or another time the narrator says there's little relation between the things we do and the events that come afterward. And, to some that might sound very tragic, but in fact, the novel, it never seems that way. It never seems tragic. And so what was it about, presenting it in that way, this idea of just sort of almost the isness of it?
Um, I think that idea might have came from my idea of what work is. This might sound a little bit far-fetched, but work as a goal-oriented thing or like perform something for a specific purpose might not might give up an individual towards the vulnerability of being controlled because you would have these ideas of goals you want to achieve. So instead, in a bottom up point of view, um, you would just move from one thing to another thing to another thing and to continue your purpose and your identity through just events after events after events instead of one giant meaning.
Yeah, is that related? Oh, so in the book, you reference one films, and at some point the narrator says about the films, he says they're explorations of feelings and ideas, less focused on plot. Perhaps that's why they tend to fail commercially. So the narrator really admires Wong Kar-wai's films, but also is contextualizing them in terms of the sort of, I guess, capitalist expectations. And I guess I'm curious how you see yourself as a writer and this sort of book existing in that world and that space.
Um, as as in
Or do you think about the novel as being an exploration of feeling an idea? Does it matter to you in terms of creating something for other people, what the commercial expectations are of this form?
uh, yeah, I think uh no, I never even thought about that. Um yeah, the I think I that kind of actually motivated me to write like this because I didn't want to have that commercial expectation. Um yeah, sorry, it's a short answer.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like what you said about the folk tales, right? How this how did this book come about? And so almost as a composite of stories that already exist and that you're curating them. Is that how you see yourself, as a curator of these folk tales?
Yeah, in a way, or the other way around, as in a way, the things that these characters read in the novel are influencing how and what they do in their own lives. So it's not like I am curating these stories, but it also goes the other way around because, as you mentioned, the whole thing is kind of like autofiction. In a way, it's performative, and I'm constantly reading these narratives and reproducing stories, and the characters are also being influenced by the stories they read. So it's more of a process than anything
Yeah, I
else.
mean, I definitely felt that when I was reading it. I felt like there's a quality to the novel where as you're reading it, it's like creating itself, like it's renewing itself constantly. And um but again, this coexistence where you feel when you're reading it that you're in a fixed place, but then the novel is so deeply philosophical. Narrator talks about this idea of heterotopia, and just could you talk about your fascination with heterotopias? Like, tell us a little bit more about what that is and how that functions for you in this novel.
Well, being having grown up in Hong Kong, this kind of like post-colonial in-between state, city that like has expiration dates. It's gonna have having been in a culture that we're slowly starting to kind of self-organize in a way, to resist certain kinds of state governance. I think that kind of, since I was there and my time visiting Hong Kong throughout the years, that kind of influenced me to think about spaces as you're letting yourself being accessed through this kind of culture, and you're also giving something up when you enter a space, and it's in a way kind of exchange. And that's why I kind of reference heterotopia in the Taiwan chapter, where the characters are in a taxi. They're leaving a hill where these Chinese characters written on lanterns are floating up in the sky, and these characters are leaving that space where language is leaving them, and they're going back to the time. Allowing yourself to be in a state is kind of what I'm fascinated with.
Yeah, and so in the novel, one of the running themes, I mean, there's this malleability, and the narrator is always in this fluid state, often expressed in terms of waiting, like waiting for their lover, waiting in different countries and waiting in different places. I'm just curious, what happens if they're no longer waiting? Like, is this when they're no longer waiting?
This is an interesting question.
What mutability, this
Yeah.
constant malleability, this constant movement, which is so interesting in terms of narrative structure, because I think in at least Western expectations for narrative structure is that events do have relationships to each other. There is the causality and all of that, but this in this book, you're representing, or you're presenting a way where that doesn't need to exist in that way. And was that
Yeah.
something you were thinking about consciously in terms of narrative structures and Western expectations or Western tropes around novels?
It was definitely, but I think I understand that a little bit better like 3 years ago, 3 years later after I finished writing this. Because I think that's essentially I kind of want to explore how chaos can work. What if one thing can happen without causality, then how do we understand he can be removed that way? Because in a way, ideas like depth would be thought about differently. Like you don't owe another, you're not doing this for me because you owe me a favor and whatnot. You're doing things for other reasons. So how do you understand um social or order, so to speak, if causality is not at the forefront?
And how does that function? So in the novel, the narrator, you know, they're in this relationship, and um, the lover is so fascinating because she's so down to earth and yet so difficult to hold on to at the same time. And um, how does these ideas, these sort of political ideas, these social ideas, and then the way they sort of function within this, you know, romantic relationship, like, um, what were you doing there? Like, I feel like you're doing a lot, but I want to hear you talk about it.
Yeah, the idea of waiting and having like having the thing arrived and having to wait again, kind of like how the lover is has always, the narrator is always waiting for the lover, is just this state of constant transition. And I think that is also influenced by being from Hong Kong, because I grew up in the 90s when it was just being handed back, and it's this state of transition. Everything is constantly changing, everything's being reinterpreted. There are constant issues that are being addressed are constantly different. And so this idea of being in a transitional state kind of influences other in the story I want that to be influencing other aspects of life as well. So in that sense, the romantic relationship is being influenced by the idea of having need to transition. It also has to do with how the relationship between cultures, because there are often in the dialogue sometimes some conversations are like slowly die out and not really omitted. So in a sense, because of the cultural background of the two characters, there are some things that you just don't want to go into. And so maybe because of that, a lot is not being said, and because of the things that aren't being said, it slowly adds up to these moments of her leaving him alone somewhere, having to wait for him, and kind of need the alone time to um because you often don't want to lose your sense of self, especially if you're in a multicultural relationship too.
Yeah, I mean, not being said, but still felt ve- very subtle. And again, it was in the section that you read with the flicking, just these certain expectations of how that's imposed on her, but it's done so subtly. It's never something you, um, I guess, related back to that idea of that social critique and doing it directly or indirectly. It's done so subtly. I want to return to we were talking about language near the beginning. And I do think, you know, again, this novel is about so many things, but one of the things it's about is language. And there's a moment where the novel explores this idea about how language can be used to make totems, or how language can, you know, be used to turn our practices or preferences into sacred objects that we then go to war over. And then that word oriental, which is used only once in the novel, and it's dropped so carefully. And it feels like this pebble that's put in the, you know, water, and it sends so many ripples out. And can you talk about that? Just the word itself, and the idea of it as a totem, and how you were working with that in this novel and in your own practice as a writer.
Right. Yeah. I try to. It's so easy to, as a writer writing in English, to kind of buy into Oriental tropes and use that as a way for you to be kind of different. And I find that kind of, it's okay if that's what you want to do, but I personally am not too interested in that. And I kind of want to critique that in a way that's by showing examples of how it's being exploited. So I referenced the film Lost in Translation, and I referenced these Buddha statues by these commercial artists that are like offensive, and and so how can you also um, talk about it by bringing attention to how it's being used instead of using it yourself, um, is kind of what I was trying to do with the chapter about Orientalism.
Yeah. Um, just for the audience, I'm going to open up to questions soon. So if you think about questions, throw them into the Q&A or in the comment section if you're on YouTube. Before I turn over to questions, just related to this idea, this conversation we're having, can you talk about the whole? The narrator
Oh,
describes, I actually just, because this novel is so deeply philosophical, I'm just curious, if you could talk about the whole, but also why a whole. So can you tell us
mm.
a little bit more about that?
Yeah, a whole is basically because in that chapter the characters are together, but that doesn't necessarily mean that one is not waiting for the other. So I wanted to explore another layer of kind of isolation or detachment that you don't want, you just want some distance with the happenings going on right now. So I came up with this idea of like a whole that like of like deep silence, and when you encounter the whole you can't like say what you mean, or you can't speak. And it's also kind of a metaphor for systemic oppression, because when you're surrounded by things that are really orientalizing you, essentially what that means is telling you what our projection of you are, and you in Western society would have to be in line with that to our expectations of what you are, right? So in that state, you kind of lose your voice, and you can't really express everything you want because you're put as a subject of the Orientalist gaze. So the idea of a whole being something that is deeply silent is kind of showing how that works.
And the narrator talks about how it's easier for some people to navigate that hole than others. Like, what is it?
Hmm.
Where does that ease come from?
I think it might come from experience. If you're really conscious and you've always been under the Orientalist gaze or being subjected as whatever people project on you, then perhaps you would have more experience knowing that, oh, that's where they're coming from, or even if your personality, you don't, as a person who doesn't really think out much about these things. For example, Harold Lee in the end, this character who's kind of like a business bro, and he doesn't really care for these things. He's able to defeat the whole. There are different ways to defeat the whole. So yeah,
But it almost seems as if it's easier to defeat the whole if you're not aware of it or if you don't think about it. Like the more you know about what's causing it, the worse it is.
probably.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
all right, let's see some questions from our audience. Here's one from YouTube. Are there certain stories you would love to write but haven't been able to, or some story you feel you need to write sometime in the future?
Yeah, I think so. I feel like I need to write sometime in the future. I'm really interested in how artificial intelligence views what we understand as identity. So, and I'm kind of exploring that right now and trying to put that together into my new project. Um, yeah,
Are you working on a new project? Can you tell us about your new project?
yeah, sure. Um, yeah, so my idea is I wanted to look at how AI views data and how data constructs identity, and use that to kind of parallel it with different religions. So, like for example, Christianity, Buddhism, and I can give you an example of something that's interesting. Is the book of Genesis can be understood if through computer science, if as like a learning curve through cognitive science, sorry, as a learning curve. So it's not really about God creating the world, but like a childhood mind, giving name to things, like giving name, this is green, this is yellow, this is red, this is a tree. So that's actually what your brain is doing. It's telling itself stories to understand the world. And it's not really about a world being created by a God. What it is that it's a childhood mind creating memories, and it's a learning curve for the childhood mind to understand what the world is. So ideas like that, I'm interested in.
That's funny, right? That is funny. That's so, and actually, we didn't talk about humor in this novel, but you're doing a
Mhm.
lot that's quite comical in some ways. Um,
Well, thank you.
but how does that function for you? What is the role of humor or the comic in your writing?
Uh, I don't. Can you tell me one part that's funny? I don't think I'm that conscious of it.
I guess maybe deadpan maybe like
Okay, yeah, yeah.
even just that moment, from the moments you read, or like the thing about the pineapples, right? There's just
Oh,
um a kind of wittiness.
yeah.
It's very serious. The book is about such serious things, but it's also very deftly handled, and sometimes that deftness gives it this lightness, this humor, this
Oh.
kind of um another unusual way of looking at something.
I think a way, like, I think humor is a good way to talk about serious things.
How did you come at
Yeah.
the title for the novel? Was that a group decision, or was that yours?
I suggested a list of titles to one of my workshops. Thank you for your feedback, and we chose this one.
You do. And what?
Yeah.
Why this one? You're eating an orange. You're
Um,
naked.
I think it kind of captures the understanding of what the relationship is. It's like you're the 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 lover character in the novel is a person who's kind of carefree, doesn't want one purpose. It's okay with um being having things constantly change, and doesn't really follow a set of rules. And so why not? Why there's nothing wrong. It's completely understandable a character like that will just be eating orange naked, um, wherever.
We have another question from the chat. This one's I actually don't know this reference. What's your favorite Eason Chan song? I'm sure I've said that.
I don't do
I don't
anything
know.
from this.
Um, um,
I don't know. I'm
well,
sorry.
let's talk about movies, like film and stories, and all the somebody. Okay,
Oh,
do you want to answer the question?
oh no, we can. Oh, yeah. Uh, I like the one that he's. Okay, thank you. Yeah. I want the Easter Chan song. I like the one where he screams a lot. I forgot the name. The one that's really chaotic and he's screaming for like 4 minutes straight. It's my favorite one. 倒挂. Okay, sorry.
Okay, another question for you from the audience. Okay, this one. In what way has being published during the pandemic been different from other times that you have been published?
Novel, so I don't really know how it's like. Sorry.
Um,
But it's nice that I didn't book. Sorry,
global,
that we can draw.
and it's said all around the
Yeah.
world. Um, what do you when were you was there a decision that you were like, okay, when we're going to be in Macau, this is what it's going to be like, and when we're going to be in Taiwan, this is what it's going to be like? Were you thinking consciously but really differentiating the places, or were you deliberately wanting them to feel more loose?
I think some places more so than others. Macau, I definitely wanted to give the feel of being in giant casinos and being surrounded by just knives pointing at you and like a sky that's painted on the ceiling. Um, yeah, that one was deliberate. Everything else was kind of natural.
Yeah, and then Macau, you described that as a non-place, and the kind of place where Portuguese is one of the official languages, and all the signs are in Portuguese, but very few people speak Portuguese.
Mm,
Right. So one of these places, was that part of also like was that a heterotopia? Is that what you were doing there with the this place
yeah.
of multiple identities?
Yeah, I mean, like I don't know, like maybe like 2 to 5% people can speak Portuguese, and most of them do speak Cantonese too. So it's just it shows you how the colonial influence is in that space.
Yeah, and do you think were you thinking about that? How like is this would you call this a post-colonial novel or a post-colonial novel?
Uh, gee, uh, maybe maybe post colonial, well, no, because of the fact that my narrators are transnational and they don't really identify with one place. So that's the only reason.
Hmm. Another question from the audience. How do you think or feel your novel will be received in places like Macau and Hong Kong?
Um, yeah, I think it'll work. I think I read the section that was kind of later on. There are good things about the Macau. The food is really interesting there. Um, I tell stories about where the food comes from. And the culture of the food there is fascinating. So I think that will not, yeah. So in that sense, maybe it'll be interesting to people who have an interest in of Macau, but also people who live in Hong Kong and Macau and are exposed to different cultures and these kind of influenced by kind of West and local Japanese culture. Those people would be interested in
Mhm.
the novel, maybe.
And related to that, how would you describe your ideal reader? Like when you imagine that, okay, this is the ideal experience that I want someone to take away from this book, what do you think of?
There was another interview that asked me that question, and I actually said that I wanted to be like an Orientalist who's not aware of their Orientalist status.
But then
Yeah, that's my ideal reader.
do they become aware of it by the end, or is it the irony of the fact that they're reading this not even realizing the whole time?
I mean, ideally they'd be aware of it by the end. Yeah.
These folk tales, I never heard of this idea that folk tales as being sort of um, politically like, like having some political kind of motivation. Um,
Oh,
was that something like, do you think of this book and is it kind of a folk tale in itself?
yeah, maybe. Yeah, I have to say that a lot of the folktales and how I use folktales is also very influenced by the Yoko Tawada, the writer, um, where she uses folktales to understand her own existence in a way, um, because sometimes of how surreal folktales are and how sometimes it feels so surreal to be in these liminal spaces.
Yeah. Okay. Another question from the audience. For future book projects, how are you thinking about innovating form?
That's an interesting question. How do well, this novel is it's a collection of like short events that happen one after another, and it kind of has a loose arc to it. For the other one, I want it to be even more scattered. So I'm working on a project where all these characters are set in this like small city that's on the edge of Hong Kong near the airport, and people from all around the world pass through, and then it's just stories that happen there. Not They kind of have a loose relationship with each other, but um and things kind of have a relationship with each other, but not in a direct way. So um maybe for my next project, form will be only explored through just a specific space and not so much anything else.
That's so exciting. I'm very excited about this project you're describing, Sheung-King. I'm sure everybody else
Hopefully.
is. Thank you so much for taking the time and giving me this chance to ask you these questions. Beautiful and very fascinating book. But sort of, I guess I'm getting a notice that we're nearing the end, and I should start to hand things off to Hazel. But I hope everybody, wherever you are, if you can just like do a little applause for Sheung-King and his beautiful book, because it's been
Thank
such a
you.
pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mahak. That was a wonderful conversation. It was lots of fun.
Hi there. Wow, it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much, Erin. Thank you so much, Mahak. My name is Hazel Miller, and I'm the co-publisher here at Book Hug Press. We, of course, the proud publisher of You Are Eating an Orange, You Are Naked. And it's my task now to sort of wrap things up for the evening. Before I do, I just wanted to turn it back to you, Sheung-King. Do you have any final parting words that you would like to say to the audience here
Uh,
tonight?
yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I'll be at another Storybook store tomorrow around noon, if you're around. And thank you so much, Hazel and Angela and Mahak for a wonderful conversation, putting all of this together. And I'm gonna need an orange now.
I think, yeah, we're all kind of hungry after that conversation. Oh, but seriously, thank you so much. That was just really fantastic. And I just have a few other thank yous that I wanted to say. Of course, thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. I was sort of spending the last hour sort of moving between the YouTube and back into Zoom, and it was just so lovely to see so many people joining us. I'd also, of course, very much like to thank Angela and everyone at Another Story for partnering with us to be able to present this event tonight. And you've probably seen throughout the chat during the night, I've been dropping in the link to purchase the book directly from the Another Story bookshop website, because I'm hoping that all of you who might not already have the book to please make sure to pick up a copy. As again, you can purchase it directly from Another Story Bookshop's website. And as Sheung-King has mentioned, he'll be at the store tomorrow around noon to personalize copies. So if you are ordering from the website, there's a field on the order form where you can indicate in the notes section your preference of how you would like him to personalize your book. And I believe the cutoff to request personalized copies is noon tomorrow, which is about the time he'll be at the store. So that way he can ensure that he'll have all the notes in hand and be able to personalize your copies. I think that is all from me. Again, thank you everyone so much. Such a pleasure, and enjoy the rest of your evening and be safe out there.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.